morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to talk about, as Doug mentioned, a coach's role in clean sport. I got in here last night and had the chance to walk around and talk with some of the coaches as well as the exhibitors. And one thing that was quite interesting in my conversations is that there's really not a role for coaches when it comes to anti-doping, and that's often seen as a responsibility for doctors or team doctors, nutritionists, and so it's not necessarily the responsibility of a coach to know about anti-doping, to have the answers in terms of what the rules are and offer that guidance to an athlete. And so I'm here to inform you that if that is your view of anti-doping, you are mistaken in that there is a responsibility of a coach. And it may not seem as clear to you, but I will walk you through what that looks like. And I would love to also hear from you as well in terms of how you see yourself fitting into this anti-doping world. Smart. Okay, so first, let me talk just a little bit about USADA. And I'm sure anyone in here unfamiliar with USADA? U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. We just celebrated 15 years. Our mission, of course, is to protect the rights of athletes. And so we're known for drug testing, blood and urine, but of course that's just one aspect of our organization. Thank you. We are also in charge of education, research and science. Of course, there's the results management side of the house as well. So really, USADA is bigger than just drug testing. We have deterrence, detection programs, education initiatives, and so really our values are the core of our organization. They tie us to everything that we do, and ultimately we want to be the guardians of the values and the life lessons learned through sport. And so we feel that it starts at an early age where the influence takes place, and it's easy to offer that influence, and it transcends through an athlete's career, be it in sport or off the field. Okay, so let's talk about coaches and anti-doping. What do you see as your role, the coaches in the room? What would you say your involvement has been, what you think it should be, if you should have any involvement at all as it relates to anti-doping? Education. Anything else? Anyone think it's not your duty to know anything about anti-doping? No? You have to, yes, okay, great. Good, then you're on my same page. There is a role, it starts with education, and actually at this level, so our jurisdiction is Olympic and Paralympic sports. We do have some jurisdiction in the professional sport world. If you've been reading in the news recently, we've taken on UFC's drug testing program, and we've also in the past we oversee drug testing programs for professional boxing. So our main sort of space where we play in the sandbox is Olympic and Paralympic sports. And so the WADA Code is what governs all of what we do. And in that code, it outlines what the role of a coach is as it relates to anti-doping. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And so there's a couple of different points in the code, and it doesn't specifically say coach. Coach is grouped into the athlete support personnel category. So what you can see here, it's everything from what was just mentioned, education. It's to be knowledgeable of and comply with all anti-doping policies and rules adopted by the code. So for some of you, you may be thinking, well, I'm not really involved with Olympic level athletes or Paralympic athletes. My coaching target is primarily collegiate level. There might be some crossover for some of you, but you may be thinking to yourself, I'm not even involved. I don't know anything about the code. I don't want to know anything about it because I play NCAA collegiate level. it's really important to understand the differences. It's important to know that you may have an athlete who's also competing in an Olympic, a Paralympic sport. And so you do need to be knowledgeable as a coach, especially when you're talking about athletes who are on the road to competing at an elite level. Another point that's made in the code is that you need to understand the testing program. This is huge because there are differences in how we conduct our testing procedures than, say, the way it works in NCAA. I've had, in my work at USADA, I've talked to many athletes who compete at both the Olympic levels as well as the collegiate levels, and there are definitely some major significant differences in how we conduct the process. The other one is just knowing the differences in what's prohibited and what's permitted. And so that's one area as a coach in your world that it would be important for you to understand. How does it work on the anti-doping Olympic, Paralympic side of the house? And how does that differ with my athlete who might be competing at an elite level? Maybe you don't have athletes that are at that level. Maybe you're dealing with developmental groups, younger age groups. This is also important. Helping them, starting those conversations, helping them understand that there are things out there that are not good for you, that are against the rules, that may enhance your performance and go against the inherent sort of value and the spirit of sport. And so that's something that we offer as well from an educational standpoint. We outline for you what those differences are, especially at that NCAA level. And you can see that, you know, where we use the word prohibited, it may be used within NCAA, but it also might be restricted, and there may be some different limitations and rules around that particular substance. So this is a really great point in terms of being knowledgeable, understanding the rules. You don't have to have all of the answers. That's definitely not what we're asking of you, and we don't ask the athletes to know everything as well. But what we do want and highly encourage is that you understand the resources that are out there and know where to go when you need to get those answers. And USADA can be that resource for you. There's several other points that are outlined here, and it talks about just understanding, being willing to acknowledge if there is a violation. In order to do that, it means understanding what doping is. And so does anybody know, when we use that term doping, what does that mean? Using drugs. Is that it? Foreign substances, banned substances, yes. Positive tests, those type of things. What about if you are trafficking a prohibited substance? You think that's considered doping? Yes. Seeing head nods. It is. And so there are, if I'm not mistaken, there are 12 definitions of doping per the WADA Code. And so it's everything from the obvious of actually having the presence of a prohibited substance in your system to possession and trafficking of a prohibited substance. It's everything from violating rules that evading testing. So if there's proof of that and we're able to find evidence of that, those are definitions of doping. And so it's not just this idea that you test positive. It goes beyond that. And there are 12 specific definitions of doping. So again, just going into more of the roles and the responsibilities of athlete support personnel, that would be you. It talks about just understanding those anti-doping rule violations and being willing to admit if in fact you have committed one yourself, and just cooperating with investigations, those types of things. So really think bigger than just, you know, this idea that maybe my athlete may have a positive test and so I may have some involvement there. The goal would be to be knowledgeable so that you can guide your athlete and keep them from violating these rules. And so that is ultimately part of your duty as a coach at this level. Now let's shift gears just a little bit. So, you know, one of the things that USADA took on, it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we conducted a survey called What Sport Means in America. And I'm not sure if you guys have come across this at all, had a chance to read some of the results of that survey. But our goal was, we surveyed about 9,000 people, everyone from teachers to coaches that are part of national governing bodies and outside of national governing bodies, kids, ages 8 to 17. So we had about 9,000 respondents. And so what we were trying to get from this survey is to determine ultimately, how does America view sports? What do they believe sport offers? And is sport actually living up to its full potential? And I have to be quite honest with you, I don't think we learned any sort of earth-shattering results from the survey. I think it only confirmed many things that we sort of assumed and that we had known. But I wanted to share with you some of those results because I think they're they very much tie into this idea of coaches in clean sport and what your role is, and really the depth of your influence as a coach. And so, not sure if you're able to see that. I'll highlight a couple of them. Really, the key findings is that, of course, sport plays a huge role in the lives of Americans. And this was conducted solely in the U.S., and so that's why I'm specifying U.S. Pretty much 162 million Americans, and it's probably a much higher number today as this was conducted 4 or 5 years ago. So that's about 3/5 of adults in the U.S. have some relationship with sport. That's a lot of people. So sport is impacting lives across this country, and be it you're playing yourself, you played, you've got children playing, you're somehow involved. But there are 3/5 of adults in the U.S. who have some relationship with sport-related activities. Now, parents talked about their reason for their kids being involved in sport, and essentially they feel that personal and social values, when describing their hopes for their children, they get those out of sport. So it's more than just, I want my kid to be active and I want them to, meet other people and have fun. Those things are important as well, but there was this intrinsic connection to values that can be learned from a child's participation in sport. And one of the biggest, I think, and most impactful results from the survey had everything to do with a coach. And that a coach ranks as by far the #1 influence, particularly with a younger athlete. But you've got the most influence. And for those kids who are involved in sport early on, they're looking to you to help guide and shape their decisions. They're looking for you to help determine what their performance looks like in sport and really help instill a positive sport experience. And so that influence does change as an athlete gets older. While you're still in the top 3, it really starts to shift to athletes. And so that's both in the Olympic world as well as the professional world. And they then become that #1 influence, that #1 role model for athletes as they get older. So some other results from the survey, and I'm just highlighting some of the key findings. The other one I think that's important is that, really 90% of the adults that took the survey, they agree that well-known athletes have a responsibility, as I just mentioned. Americans rank the use of performance-enhancing drugs as the most serious problem facing sport today. So again, another reason why it's really important to understand this anti-doping world. And the reality is performance-enhancing drugs are here, and hopefully they're not here to stay. But knowing the nature of this atmosphere and how the impact of performance-enhancing drugs, what it has on your athletes, is really, truly important. I cannot stress that enough. And then the other one here, I think what we found is that really, ideally, this idea that sport plays a major role in American lives, we want to preserve the integrity of sport. And that's also part of USADA's mission, to preserve and inspire the integrity of sport. So, like I said, the research shows you guys are it, #1 influencers, mainly in a youth athlete's life. However, I think it's important to know, and I'm sure you do at this stage in your career, you know the influence that you have on your athletes, and you know that they look to you for probably more than just guidance on strength and conditioning and their performance and how to be a better athlete, but know that they're looking for you to have an attitude about anti-doping and to use your influence to inspire a positive attitude as it relates to anti-doping. So USADA understands that, look, doping in sport is ultimately an ethical issue. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of decision making. It is not, it's that simple. And so for that reason, USADA is the guardian of values and life lessons learned through sport. And they express that through drug testing, through science and research, through results and adjudication. The other arm of USADA is TrueSport. And TrueSport is truly the education arm that gets to focus on the values, and that's where the connection lies. We champion the life lessons learned through TrueSport. We really feel that if we start early to influence coaches, parents, athletes at a much younger age, we have the opportunity to make an impact on sport that is positive. We have an opportunity to strengthen the foundation of an athlete's perspective so that when they reach an elite level and they are looking for you, coach, for guidance, and they are looking for that influence, they have the core values established early on through education at an early age. So TrueSport believes, we believe in winning, there's no question about that. But we believe in winning just as USADA does, the right way. We're part of USADA, we're just a division within the organization, and so for that, we love winning, we believe in it, and we believe in doing it the right way. We also believe in the values in sport. And so again, I talk about those 5 core values: respect, integrity, teamwork, responsibility, and courage. Those 5 values connect us to USADA, where within the organization, they're a bit more internally facing. TrueSport wants to make those outwardly facing and really hone in on those values as the core foundation of our program, so that when we're interacting with young athletes, their parents, their coaches, we're talking about good decision making. We're talking about goal setting. We're talking about nutrition. We're talking about supplements and performance enhancing drugs. But at the end of the day, we want to be teaching values. And so ultimately, building a strong moral compass will ultimately create better decisions in the long run when these athletes are at this collegiate level, at an elite level. The goal and the hope is that they're making better decisions when they get to that stage. So, I've talked about TrueSport at a couple different conferences, and oftentimes people wonder, well, why is USADA embarking on this? Really their space is anti-doping and drug testing, and so help me understand why this is something that USADA is spending time on. And so the reality is there's a need for it. And why not have the gold standard of excellence, if you will, in anti-doping take on not only drug testing and fighting that battle, but starting early so that it really goes hand in hand. And so, some of the results, again, from our survey tell us that there's a need for an organization to really talk about the fact that there is a values crisis in sport, and sport is not living up to its full potential. We are selling our kids short in terms of what they can get out of sport. And so for that, if they're dropping out of sport at 12 or 13, they're never going to get to this level where they're getting to get the experiences, the life lessons, the growth that comes with competing early on and going on throughout their high school, collegiate, and beyond careers. So, 85% of our survey respondents said, look, sport's not doing what it's supposed to. It is supposed to be reinforcing values in life that can transcend outside of sport, but it's not really doing that. It's really emphasizing winning. And again, I said before, we like winning. We just want winning to happen the right way. And so if sport is not allowing winning the right way to happen, if it's not enforcing those values, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for you as a coach? Is it all about skills and drills, strength and conditioning, or is there more that you can offer as a coach at this stage to really help ensure that your athletes are getting all that they can out of sport and that the next generation of athletes also gets that opportunity? Now, one of the things that we're doing, I talked about our program and TrueSport and, we're teaching values, but what does that mean? Well, we're working with organizations, sport organizations in particular, one being USA Swimming. We're going into our third year in terms of our partnership where we are able to teach values and lessons such as nutrition, goal setting, teamwork, decision making. We're able to teach these lessons, really show behavior change through our program by working with them on something called Deck Pass. And so they've got this cool app for kids, and they get a chance to earn patches, virtual patches based on their behaviors. And so what we are able to do is show that you can learn about these things in a fun way. You can have these conversations early on. And for kids, it just seems like they're doing something that's fun and cool. They're earning all these really great patches. However, we're able to demonstrate that we're instilling positive behavior change. We're teaching values. And so there's a tremendous amount of impact that happens through this program. We're going to events where we're able to interact with athletes. There's athlete ambassadors who are Olympic, current athletes, former athletes, retired athletes who are helping to reinforce those messages. And so, again, that's one of the ways in which we go about our TrueSport program, is working with organizations like USA Swimming to reach their members, to reach their parents, to reach their coaches and their kids, to show them that, values in sport are important. Yes, there's a values crisis in sport, but TrueSport's here to show you that here's how you navigate that and how you can make sure that values are not thrown by the wayside, and that they are just as important as winning. So just to show you some of the things that we've been doing in the TrueSport world, we've been part of USADA in terms of the concept since USADA's inception. However, a more formalized program within the last four years or so. So we're really still very new in terms of this idea that we're the champions of the values and the life lessons learned through sport. We've got a handful of followers on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, but one of the things we are doing is we're trying to increase our engagement and just our interactions with coaches, with parents, and we're doing that mainly on our website. So there we provide content that helps you figure out, how do we talk about leadership? How do we talk about performance enhancing drugs? What are the things that I can do as a coach that can better support my athlete? What can I do as a parent to better support my athlete? That type of information is available on our website, and we're getting a lot of engagement there from those audiences. Overall, we're seeing almost 95% positive impact all around. So the work that we're doing with swimming, with some of the other organizations that you see here, Air Force, an organization in New Orleans called A's and Aces, Colorado College, we have these partnerships and we're making a huge impact because we're keeping values first. One of the things this is our website here, and you can take a look at it, when you have time, TrueSport.org. Really the biggest thing is, I think the way we see it is just starting to think about really as a coach. I talked a little bit about the anti-doping side of it, which is really important, but I think at the end of the day, your role as a coach has everything to do with making sure that there's a positive experience for your athlete and keeping in mind those values. Because, like I said, doping is an ethical decision, and it's a choice you make if you in fact do violate the rules. And so I think as a coach, you can offer guidance by being knowledgeable, understanding those rules, knowing the resources that are out there, USADA, so that you can guide your athlete to get the answers that they need. We're not expecting you by any means to have them all, but just knowing where to go to get those answers, that's really important. But you just want to start thinking about like what type of athlete, student, person do you want to come out of your program? How will they remember you as their coach? Because really at the end of the day, and this is something our CEO has said in the past, win or lose, you have to remind them that competing clean is what's most important. They're, at whatever age, whatever stage in their career, they're honoring their country, they're honoring their sport. And to be honest, that is ultimately how they honor you as a coach. And so, as you're going through day to day, you're looking for the best tools to make sure that they can perform well when they're out on the field or the court. I think all of those things are important, but it's just as important to understand, what type of person are you developing, and how do you want them to look at you? What legacy are they leaving? What impact are they making in sport? And I think depending on how you answer that, it can ultimately become a tribute to you as a coach and what role you play in that athlete's life. So that is my story. And I think, really it's a matter of being educated. I think the short of it as a coach is being educated and understanding what your responsibilities are, and really using your influence. I think that's key. That's something we found in the survey. It's important that you know that you have a huge influence and being able to use it accordingly to promote a positive sport experience. So I thank you guys for your time.